I think the most important way that we can build culture is by being curious and understanding what people's needs are. And then instead of just being an active listener, which is really important for empathy, being compassionate, which is turning that empathy into action.
In a rapidly evolving world where work is shaped by AI, hybrid models, and generational shifts, many are asking a deeper question: why are we here? Jennifer Moss, award winning author and workplace culture expert, tackles the question head on in her latest book, Why Are We Here? Creating a Work Culture Everyone Wants. Jennifer goes beyond quick fixes, offering leaders a research driven, human centered roadmap for promoting purpose, belonging, and resiliency in the workplace. Jennifer is an internationally recognized speaker, award winning journalist, and workplace strategist specializing in employee well being and culture. She has advised organizations from startups to Fortune 500 companies, writes for Harvard Business Review, and her work has appeared in Time, Fortune, The Wall Street Journal, and more. Today we'll explore how leaders can create a culture where people thrive by building hope, purpose, and connection. Lori Murphy, Assistant Division Director for Executive Education at the Federal Judicial Center, is the host for today's episode. Lori, take it away.
Jen, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. This is going to be great.
What inspired you to write this book, and why is it especially meaningful now?
This book was a genesis of a feeling that I was having. I've written The Burnout Epidemic about all these different parts of a design flaw in work that creates this chronic stress. And there was a point in around 2022, just before the Great Resignation, and people were talking about needing to make a change in their lives. They had this sort of sense of urgency. It was either I have to leave a legacy or it was I have to get out of this toxic environment right now. Like there's no more time. And when I dug into the research, it was really focused on this research around mortality salience and what happens when we face our mortality. It creates these psychological triggers that are subconscious and it makes us discount time, makes us think about time in a very different way. And because it was global and collective and it wasn't acute, it was just years of us being in this state of mortality salience, this life is short mentality. It created this need to leave our jobs. We saw more divorces. We saw the massive amount of CEO departures. It was changing people's minds about everything. And I realized we were in a new paradigm of work. And that's why I really believe that the Great Resignation was a result of that. And that's where the book came from.
Well, that leads me to this question. You say in the book, detachment isn't the lack of ambition, it's the lack of inspiration. What do you mean by that exactly? And why is it so relevant in our current environment?
This is such an important topic because we hear constantly, yeah, especially with young people, they're lazy and tired, they lack ambition. And I believe that well-being isn't antithetical to work ethic. You can have an incredibly high work ethic and still want to spend time with your family and still want to have friendships and be able to give time to that and give time to yourself. And you don't want to be sick at work. When we talk about ambition with this sense of toxic productivity, if you're not doing something at every single minute, then you aren't ambitious or you aren't productive. And that is dangerous. They're so focused on this need to be productive, which amplified in the pandemic. It amplified a 10x. For example, video conferencing meetings increased by 252% between 2019 and 2021. And meanwhile, all the science shows that you need to actually have downtime, creative rest, and emotional rest and social rest for you to be effective.
Your book is broken up into sections, antidotes to what you're talking about. And the first of those is hope. What are the drivers of hopelessness in our organizations, and why is hope so important to building culture?
I really felt that we needed to get back to the human parts of work because in the last 5 years, we've become increasingly transactional. Hope, when you really go into the research, Snyder's hope theory, it really is about feeling like that you have the capacity to hit your goals and to see the future and knowing and believing that the future, no matter what the situation, is going to be okay. I was on the World Happiness Council and they look at happiest countries around the world. The US, for example, in the top 21, I think, or 22, is still like up there as a really happy country. But when you index for anyone 30 and under, it ranks 68th. We're seeing this increase in what is called FOBO, which is fear of obsolescence. And this is increasing dramatically in young people. They finish a degree and, 50% of them after their degree won't really have a job because it's become obsolete. There's a real lack of entry level jobs for young people. So when you think about how much that would impact your organization when we're talking about goals and not believing you can hit those goals, how is anyone going to be retained? How is anyone going to want to innovate? They don't want to innovate themselves out of their jobs. They don't see a path forward. And so hopelessness has a real detriment, but hope can be unbelievably beneficial. And there are strategies to build hope inside of organizations.
Tell us about some of those strategies. What would you say is the top 1 or 2?
What I love about hope building, and everyone says hope is a myth, and I've changed a lot of minds around this idea. I interviewed these generals and these high level leaders inside the military, and they say hope is the only strategy. How am I going to get someone to go on a mission where they're risking their lives if they don't see that there's hopefulness in accomplishing it? So we've taken a lot from the military and the concepts that they've built around burnout and psychological safety, and hope as a strategy is another one that they've really embraced. And we do that through these concepts of Snyder's hope theory. You have to come up with the goal. And right now, because we have a sense of hopelessness, we should make goals much shorter. So it should be daily goals and weekly goals until people build up their sense of hope. So it could be just cleaning my desk today or emailing that person back that I have been avoiding emailing back, or to handle this one task. Give yourself the day and the weekly goal. And then it's all about pathways thinking. We as a team are going to accomplish this by the end of the week. Here are the pathways to get there. If plan A doesn't work, we've got plan B and plan C. And that gives your brain cognitive rest because it knows it has other plans to fall back on. So it's not so committed to the plan A. And if it fails, that's it. We're failures. And then the third piece is having the resources, making sure that you've planned ahead to say, what are the barriers? What are the things that we're going to need to have the resources to get there? And if you do that kind of as a monthly intervention or a monthly action, it really does build this sense of cognitive hope, because every time you accomplish one little thing, you pat yourself on the back subconsciously and you go, oh, I can do other bigger things. And that grows and that manifests and that becomes a more hopeful culture within your teams, which spreads then across the rest of the organization.
How can we use reskilling and upskilling employees to combat burnout and create hope?
Sometimes we as humans get very present minded or have catastrophic thinking. So it's like, I just need to survive. And when you are feeling hopeless, that is what happens. You live day to day, you're in survival mode, you're not thinking about the future, which isn't healthy. So we need to be thinking about the future. What is the plan for the future? And spend time in that, thinking about this for me, for my team. How can I make sure that I'm giving them the skills so that they will still be able to be part of this environment or part of this sector in the future? And have very open conversations about things that are frightening people. What does AI look like? How is that going to impact our workforce? And it's fully okay to say, I don't know what the future holds, because none of us do. And so we need to be open to that. But I think what we're seeing is a lot of ignoring of the problem. And unfortunately, that's just making people feel worse than if you're saying, I don't actually know, but let's work together to create a future for you in this sector and in this industry. And another thing is that we need to remove the bias around this AI training and that concept of AI training. We're in the what is called the silver tsunami. There's a lot of people over the next 5 years going to be retiring. And in the exit interviews, they found that 40% of those mature workers that were taking early retirement would have stayed if they were included in the ongoing training around AI, in the upskilling and reskilling that's happening. But there's this sense of, okay, you're past this, you don't want to learn, or you're not showing interest, or you're retiring soon. So we're going to put our budget in continuing education towards our younger workforce. And that's dangerous because we are going to have a really very thin pipeline of mature workers that have a ton of wisdom and have offer us a lot of knowledge, and we're losing that.
How does purpose function differently than hope? And how does finding purpose lead to hope?
Purpose is about feeling like that the day-to-day things that you do have some sort of impact or meaning. We're seeing this increase in bore out, which is burnout is overwhelmed, and bore out is feeling underwhelmed or under challenged. And when we think about purpose and meaning, a lot of our day-to-day tasks cannot feel that purposeful. It can be demoralizing, it can lead to bore out or burnout. So we need to understand that people are doing a lot more admin and a lot more tasks than ever before. This meeting fatigue is so high, the amount of meetings we're doing in a day. So the first goal is to make sure that people's workload is manageable and they're not just overwhelmingly engaged in tasks that feel like they have no purpose. On a day-to-day basis, you don't really think about the mission statement. You're thinking about your own values, like what matters to me. And some of the times when we build in this sense of meaning and purpose, there's the ancillary stuff at work that can build that too, like friendships and feeling like you go to work and there's some project that you're involved in that you think you're really your values are aligned to. Or it could be that you're part of an ERG, an employee resource group that volunteers, it's part of climate change, or are focused on women's leadership. We have to have some of those other intangible pieces still very present so that even my day-to-day tasks might not be that exciting, but I have a best friend that I love going into work to talk to, or I have this cool program that I'm engaged in. Those things do help with our purpose and meaning if it's not just the work itself.
How can leaders then encourage or foster connections between the purpose and core values?
Managers have a huge influence on your day to day experience of life. Managers have around a 70% variance on your engagement. That's how impactful they are. And it can flip the other way if they're not a good manager. So managers need to feel autonomous. And when it comes to purpose, it's being able to say, let's think what we're working on this week. Are you using the things that are your favorite skills? Are you enjoying your work? What parts do you enjoy the most? What parts do you enjoy the least? Where are your strengths? And crafting, job crafting to make sure that people have a percentage of their time where they're doing work that gives them some level of engagement. And it doesn't even need to be happiness. I mean, we use that word, it's very nebulous, but a feeling of accomplishment. When you lose that engagement, you're really going to see a high attrition. And managers can be fluid with that. Every week can be 20 minutes. Go around and ask what lit you up this week. So you learn about the motivators, what stressed you out. You can find out where people's blockers are. And then what can we do as a team to make next week easier, make next week better. And so then you're constantly building hope skills because you're solving problems and you're executing them, but you're building morale and you're building a sense of using people's skills that light them up, and you're managing those stressors, and that ends up creating a lot of sense of purpose, and then that translates to a lot of excitement and enthusiasm for the organization you're working with or the team you're working with, because you think, wow, I have a place here and I'm good at my job and I feel like I'm impactful. And that tends to take away that sense of hopelessness. It pulls away from that because a lot of the chemistry that comes with feeling good about what you do tampers or buffers against a sense of hopelessness.
You alluded to this earlier. How important is a sense of community at work, and what's the impact when there's a lack of community?
Of all the things we should be focusing on right now, it should be building community. That should be our strategic imperative. And everyone thinks, oh, well, it should be retention or engagement or productivity. But I feel like morale and measuring people's sense of connection within the organization is the most important aspect, because you can have a hardcore culture that's just focusing on growth, but we've seen across the research that it lasts for maybe a few quarters or maybe even a couple of years. But what happens is your highest performers leave and you see an erosion of morale, and then you start to see things fall apart. When you have people working together and not having any sense of cohesion, you just have individuals trying to achieve separate goals and have expectations then even harder for you to meet, because you need a cohesive team to meet those objectives and those expectations. And you need a cohesive team to buffer from all of the stress and change and anxiety that's surrounding you. And what the data finds is that, if you have a best friend at work, this close ally at work, and this is Gallup's data around the Q12 that they measure, they find that you're 50% more likely to stay. You have this increase in well being. You're more effective. You're more efficient. You decrease absenteeism or presenteeism. And this is a big factor right now, is people just not feeling well enough, or they're so stressed out, they're not showing up to work. And the cascade when that happens, if you have a small team or pretty tight knit team, and then you see people starting to drop off and not showing up, that person at the top, especially we're seeing with leaders, are carrying the entire load. And then that's why we're seeing such a increase in early retirement. We're also seeing a real issue with attrition within certain groups. And the thing with community is we're feeling like maybe it's hybrid work or remote work, or just this sense of loneliness or isolation that people are talking about. Oh, it's just like a lonely world out there. But when you dig in, you're finding that none of those things are the real issue. And I really see it as is that we're time starved. And I talk about Laura Gerge's research. She's in the London School of Economics. She's a professor there, and she talks about time poverty. And the more time poor we are, the less likely we are to want to be social, and the less likely we are to go above and beyond, the less likely we are to, hang out with our peers after work. We are just not going to feel like investing in each other is worth it if that means I'm going to spend another 2 hours in my pajamas doing admin at night. And so we need to figure out, really at the root level, the hygiene level, how do we manage workloads that also include in the day time for each other, time for team building, time for, just connecting with each other, because all of that together ends up leading to the cohesion we need, and people just attending work, showing up to work, being at work. That is a very important part of community when you think about those end results.
So, how can leaders then help impact that sense of time poverty or just generally help build that sense of community beyond, it sounds like, giving some room in the day for that to happen?
When we actually investigate what is causing burnout, it's usually inefficient processes. It's usually things that we have, again, amplified since the pandemic. Over meeting, we should be reducing meetings as much as possible. They're not necessary. We also have to change the way that we have our meetings together. We need to make sure that there's a person that's accountable for the outcomes. There's a person that is scribing them, that we can have async meetings where we're recording those meetings and someone else can look at them when it makes sense to them, that we can have debrief notes, and that people are invited into meetings when they're needed. So they don't need to be there for the full hour. They're there for 15 minutes to just be productive, and then they can go and have their time back. Those types of things are really important. So being much more disciplined around when we're gathering. It also is about looking at processes we've seen, and this was with RSM. I worked with this one accounting firm, and they're an international firm. And when they found out, when it was about compliance technology that they had implemented, that it was not implemented correctly, that people didn't understand the language and didn't really understand the technology very well, but they didn't want to put their hand up to say, I'm not using this technology very well. So people were just living in this kind of constant quagmire of like, I have to do this process. I'm slow at it. It's slowing me down and I'm mad about it, but I'm not telling anyone. When you really dig into those kinds of things, it's not about an overhaul. It's like, where are the small efficiencies in all of the elements of my work? And we do this as a team and we talk about them and we have very open, honest conversations about what those look like. What are the processes that are really causing a threat to our workload? And once we start narrowing in on that, it was in every situation where I found it was processes, it was such a solvable problem. We started to bring in ambassadors to do more training. We made it so training was across the board. So no one team or no one individual was called out. It was just improvement. It was the technology company looking at the technology to improve the process. Like there's a lot that we can do, but we just need to talk about it and be explicit. And then once we pull that back and we get our time back, we have to be so disciplined about not adding more work into that mix. We need to be disciplined to say, okay, we've got efficiency back. When you have just, this is Cornell research, if you just have one 20-minute lunch away from your desk once a week, so that's 20 minutes of changing culture, in 20 minutes. If you just have one lunch once a week with a coworker, it improves morale, it improves efficiency, it improves safety. So you have physical and psychological safety, and you're more likely to stay. So these are the things, it's incremental adjustments to reducing process to reduce workload and then increase these kinds of interventions of just having lunch with someone else or creating opportunity to have more rituals, celebrate and hang out with each other and not talk work. Or if you want to talk shop, at least it's, an environment where you're having a bit of fun and bringing that levity back. I think that all those things together, both reducing time poverty and increasing time wealth, and then filling that time wealth with community is how we have that perfect recipe.
And it sounds like the managers or leaders modeling that it's okay to have a little bit of fun, a little bit of downtime is important too.
You know what? You nailed it on the head there because the most important thing that we should be doing as leaders is modeling the behaviors we want to see. I've been saying that going to work is like going to school without art, gym, or recess. And, it feels like there's just recess is gone and joy is gone. And we don't have all those extracurriculars. Everything's been stripped down to just this transactional experience of work. And across all of the well-being research and across research that Gallup does around friendships, that's the gray area stuff. The reason you go to work, the reason you have joy in your life is this, and that's how you have work life integration in a healthy way, because you have those rituals, you have that fun, there's a little tiny bit of recess when you go to work. And we're really missing that. We're really desperate for it right now.
So, moving on to belonging for a moment, what's the value different perspectives bring to an organization?
From a complete like business strategy, from an organizational strategy, to be successful means representing who you're serving. And then it's also when you have diverse thinking inside of your organization, you just do better. All of the data shows that you outperform those that aren't in a diverse environment. But I think when it comes to belonging, we need to realize that people want to have optimal distinctiveness. And this is a psychology term that I love. Optimal distinctiveness is fitting in and standing out at the same time. So we all as humans want to feel like we're part of a group. We also want to feel like we can be our authentic selves. And I say that with the understanding that my authentic self, maybe in front of my kids, is going to be a different authentic self than I am going to be in this conversation or in a professional setting on stage. But I still want to feel like I'm me at the heart of that. So we can wear different hats and still be our authentic self, but we want people to also think that's cool, that your uniqueness and who you are and your differences and your cultural beliefs, your religious beliefs, your political beliefs are all very much accepted as part of who you are, and you can still also feel like you belong. A big part of what we need to be doing as leaders is figuring out how to have people feel like they can be themselves and they're not going to be judged, not going to be called out, they're not going to be shamed. It's more about celebrating when people do really awesome things and talking about one really great idea every single week, and make sure you as a leader are pulling from diverse groups so you can share about what people are doing from different environments, and letting people show what they do by putting them in situations where they can do show and tells and they can talk about the cool stuff they've done. So it becomes about the work again and about our sense of capacity and what we can do and having that highlighted versus it being specific to an individual. And I think that's where we can come together because we're all sharing a common goal within our teams and our organizations.
Jen, what else do you wish leaders knew about building the culture that they want?
I think the most important way that we can build culture is by being curious and understanding what people's needs are. And then instead of just being an active listener, which is really important for empathy, being compassionate, which is turning that empathy into action. And, managers on a constant basis can be gathering data. What are you struggling with? Okay, for the next month, let's iterate. Let's do a test. I'm going to reduce our meetings by 10% this month, or I'm going to make sure that we do an admin process review over the next 2 months, and we're all going to talk about the things we hate the most about our processes, and then we're going to try to fix them, and we're going to make it fun and funny, and use a whiteboard and talk about all the horrible things that happen. These are the kind of things that I've seen in real life. There's a great example of a hospital consortium that had this really cool web tool where you could go in and say what you hate most about your electronic record keeping software, and they would win prizes for the most hilarious and most awful thing that happened with this electronic record keeping management system. And by the end of this program that they created, they saved 5,000 nursing hours. 5,000 nursing hours, which meant those nurses got to spend more time with their patients doing what they love to do. So that's where curiosity leads to outcomes. So we need to do a better job of letting people be vulnerable, being curious about them, having not like come to it with not judgment, but interest in wanting to solve problems. And if you have that kind of mentality within the culture, what happens out of that is real change, is small incremental real change that gives them their time back, and over time it leads to people feeling happier at work, more connected to people. That less friction leads to more innovation, more creativity, and it's about small wins and not looking at an overhaul. That's what the book is really focused on. It's like, what are the tiny things that you can do all the time within your teams as an individual to slowly chip away at the erosion that's happened to culture and then bring it back to its natural glory.
Where can we learn more about you in this topic?
Jennifer-moss.com. So much stuff there on my blogs and articles. We have this really cool thing too now that we're launching is this burnout assessment. So people seeing where they are from their burnout, and then workbooks to support that. So we're sort of digging deep into giving individuals that ability to work within the systems. We don't have to feel helpless. We all have a role.
I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thanks so much for having this great conversation, Lori. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori, and thank you for listening. For more episodes, visit the podcast link at fjc.dcn/EE or fjc.gov. You can also listen and subscribe to the podcast via Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. In Session, Leading the Judiciary is produced by Shelley Easter. Our program is supported by Lori Murphy, Malcolm Everett, Jamie Mitchell, and the entire studio and live production team. This podcast was produced at U.S. taxpayer expense. Until next time, thanks for listening.